Hello, and welcome to The Banker's View from Money 2020 Europe in Copenhagen. I'm Joy Macknight, Deputy Editor at The Banker, and I'm joined by Neela Das, who is Head of Product Innovation at Accuity, a payments and compliance company. And what we're doing at Money 2020 is we're really looking at women in innovation and payments. So thank you so much for joining us today, Neela.
It's great to see you here.
Can you tell me a little bit about what you think are the biggest sort of disruptive forces in payments today?
Yeah, I was thinking about this quite a lot actually, and I think some of it is us as people. Our expectations have completely changed, and I think back in the day you could have said, oh well, there was work life and there was home life and they're very different, but that's no longer the case. The instant people had a smartphone in their hand, their expectation of technology, their expectation of speed of response completely changed, and you could argue that it did because it brought technology so much closer to people. It changed everybody's expectations, and they expect that to happen both in corporate life and in their real life. So I think there's a real understanding that there's a level of democratization that needs to happen. If you then flip that on its head, and as I said, I spend far too much thinking about these kinds of use cases, and I have a background in publishing, so I think I have a slightly different perspective from a lot of other people. I was thinking about black cabs. So black cabs in London have a central authority. They issue them a licence, and before, if you had to get from A to B, your only choice was a black cab, and you got in it knowing that the guy knew his, whatever it's called, the test, they had the knowledge, and they were entirely trustable. And then Uber came along, and as a woman in technology, regardless of my views on Uber, the truth of it is that they made getting in a car much easier for everybody. But then as a normal consumer, your challenge becomes, how do I know that this Uber driver is safe? Now, in Uber's case, they brought in driver ratings. That's what that's there to do. But to my mind, it's very similar to some of the challenges that we face in our industry, where essentially money is something that is issued by a central bank. And that's what we used to transfer. That's how, that's how value was exchanged. I would say the concept of money itself is changing, and we've been discussing how instead of transferring money, actually we now have ways of transferring value, and you have now a plethora of ways of doing it. It's highly democratized, but then whether you're a corporation or a consumer, how do you know who to trust? So, I mean, it's brilliant. I love change, and there's a lot of change, and there's lots going on. But I do think ultimately some of it, obviously, technology is there and investment potential is there and market models are changing. But if you looked at the real driving force, I think people are saying, hold on a minute, this isn't good enough. And that always forces change.
Okay, but there's also a lot of regulatory change happening, isn't there? So the Payment Services Directive 2, which is coming in, and so sort of this whole move towards open banking. How is that going to affect the industry, do you think?
Again, I think it's interesting to see how that might work out. So effectively, you could say it's the app storification. And again, you have the same trust issue. So if I am a bank who somebody wants to access my API, how do I know if they are trustworthy or not? Now, from a consumer's point of view, that's brilliant. I could have potentially one app to rule them all, one app to kind of morph itself into whatever use case scenario I might be in. I want to pay in one currency here, another currency there. But as a bank, they're still your customer. They're still someone that you feel that you have a duty of responsibility towards. So how we make sure that we remain compliant, how our customers remain compliant in this ever-changing world where their core product is accessible via third parties, I think is going to be a really interesting change. And I think that's why, in some ways, in this market more than others, we are seeing more collaboration rather than out-and-out war. I think in some technologies and some industries, when there has been disruption, one has been allowed to take over the other regardless of the consequences. I think, ultimately, money is crucial to our way of life. And so society, governments have an obligation to make sure that people's money stays safe. So I think there will always be that balance between a democratization that we're seeing now, but also at some point, even the things that aren't regulated at the moment will need some level of oversight. Some people would disagree with that, I know. But then it's about how we can be the most effective we can be when there's so much that's core to us that's changing.
Well, there's compliance and there's security, which is the other aspect. How can banks really keep themselves safe? When you think about this move to faster payments, everything, the money is moving so quickly. How can banks really protect themselves?
I think it's just about being smarter, and I think there is a challenge. I think, Chris Skinner's here speaking on a number of things about core banking systems. I think, is it something insane? I can't remember how many banks are still using COBOL, so there's no denying that there are issues to address. But at the same time, I think it's about collaboration. It's about finding the right people to work with in order to make the use of new ways of identifying fraud. So, that there's so much out there at the moment about not just identifying patterns of behaviour, but looking beyond that. So we personally are really excited by things like adversarial networks, where you might start to develop models themselves that try and attack your own internal system so that you can try and second guess where fraudulent activity might happen before it occurs. So the brilliant things in some ways for us is the number of data scientists who want to work in our world. So if you make the assumption that a lot of the way that the world will be working will be using those techniques, if you have a brilliant talent pool, then you can start to really find intelligent ways to solve those problems.
Okay, and my last question is really, why are you here at Money 2020? What do you hope to get out of the conference?
As always, serendipity. Right? The best thing about a conference isn't the list of customers that you think you want to meet or the list of contacts. It's bumping into someone and having a conversation and thinking, oh, wow, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about it. And I think that's the interesting thing for us, is that we know that for fintechs, there is an element of proving their credibility. We know that for FIs, there's this pressure to change and move with the market. And actually, the interesting thing for us is that we talk to both. So we might meet someone and say, we can put you together. We work for Relics, which is a large corporate. It's got its own VC arm. We've put people in touch with them before. So I think the nice thing is a serendipity of making a connection with somebody. I think the good thing about Money 2020 is that everybody's on message, right? Everybody knows this change is coming. You're not fighting people to say, oh, by the way, things are going to change. So then you're having a very different kind of conversation. It's actually about looking to the future and the practical solutions that we can bring.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Neela.
Thank you.